Hi guys, welcome back to my YouTube channel. In today's tutorial, we are going to be learning how to make a simple cowl neck top. And if you're interested in learning how I made this ruched skirt, I'll be dropping the link in the description box. The name of this fabric is called a crepe fabric and I made use of 1.5 yards. So let's get started. Since this is a cowl neck top, I would like to cut out the back piece of the top first so that once I've gotten the back piece, I can use it to cut out the front piece of the top later. So let's start with the back piece of this top. I folded this fabric into two. The next step is to mark the shoulder line. On the shoulder line, I placed a neck width of 3 inches. For a plus size person, you should mark 4 inches. Now for the neck depth, I marked 1 inch and connected the neck depth to the neck width to form a curved neckline. After this is done, I placed the measuring tape on the shoulder line to mark my shoulder measurement divided by 2, which is 14 divided by 2, and that is 7 inches. I added extra half inch to that for sewing allowance, that made it 7.5. Now I placed my tape below the shoulder point to mark 1 inch and connected the neck width to this point, and this will form the shoulder slope. To know my chest line, I divided my bust circumference by 6 and added 1.5 inches to that, and that's 7.3 inches altogether. I placed my tape from the tip of the shoulder slope to mark 7.3 inches. So this is the armhole line. The next step is to rule across this point, and this new line will be called the chest line. To get the armhole curve, I placed my tape on the armhole line and divided the line into two to mark the midpoint. From this point I marked, I would make a curve to meet the chest line. The next step is to mark the waistline. From the shoulder line, I placed my tape to mark my waistline, which is 15 inches. Now, from the shoulder, I placed my tape to mark the full length of my top. I want the full length to be 23 inches, so I added extra 1 inch allowance to the hem, which made it 24 inches altogether. Now on the chest line, I'll place my bust circumference divided by 4. Since it's a free top and it has no zipper, I'll go ahead to mark 3 inches sewing allowance to the side. On the waistline, I placed my waist circumference divided by 4 and I added extra 3 inches allowance to the side to connect the bust circumference to the waist circumference. On the hem line, I placed my hip circumference divided by 4 and I added extra 3 inches allowance to the side to connect the hip circumference to the waist circumference. From the end of the hip circumference, I'll be making a little curve to connect these 2 points together in order to eliminate the sharp edges on that side. Now, before cutting out the back piece, I added half inch sewing allowance to the top of the shoulder slope. So this is the back piece of the top. I would place the back piece on my actual fabric to cut out the front piece of the top. To get the front piece of the top, I folded this fabric into two. Now I went ahead to place the back piece of the top directly on the actual fabric I folded. The next step is to place this folded side of the hem on the actual fabric, making sure it is placed in a slant manner. Now you can go ahead to adjust the front piece depending on how deep you want the cowl neck to be. So from here I left about 6 inches distance from the top of the actual fabric. To mark the neck depth of the front piece, I placed the measuring tape from the tip of this fold in a slant manner to meet the neck width. So I marked the neck depth as 8.5 inches because I don't want it too tight since there is no zipper. For a plus size person, you should mark 9 inches or 10 inches. Now I connected the neck width to the tip of the fold at the top. The next step is to trim out the blouse for the front piece. Now I use the neck width of the back piece as a reference to notch the neck width of the front piece. From the midpoint of the armhole on the back piece, I would also mark the midpoint of the armhole for the front piece. Now I took out the back piece and then I marked ½ inch inward from the midpoint of this armhole to connect it to the tip of the shoulder slope and to also connect this midpoint to the end of the armhole. Then I went ahead to trim out. So that is all for cutting out the front piece and the back piece of the blouse. Now I'll go ahead to cut out a facing for the neckline of the back piece. Now to cut out the facing, I folded this little piece into two, then placed the back piece directly on it to trim out the curved neckline. And to also trim out the shoulder slope. Now to know the wideness of the facing, I placed my tape from the neckline to mark 3 inches, then connected the points together. So I'm going to spread out the back piece to place the right side of the facing directly on the neckline of the back piece. To stitch by ½ inch. After stitching the neckline, I notched the seams and also top stitched this side of the facing. So that is all for the back piece. So for the front piece, the extension on the neckline would form a facing, so there's no need for you to cut an external facing. The next step is to place the front piece of the blouse directly on the back piece of the blouse. So recall that I notched the neck width of the front piece. On this notched point, I placed it directly on this line between the facing and the body of the back piece. Then I went ahead to fold the neckline from this notched point in by ½ inch. Now I'll go ahead to place the facing of the back piece directly on it. To stitch the shoulder by ½ inch. Now to stitch the other side of the shoulders together, I placed the notched neck width from here directly on the back piece of the neckline to fold the cowl neck in by ½ inch and also place the facing of the back piece directly on it. Now I pinned this together, took this to my sewing machine to stitch the shoulders together by ½ inch. After stitching the shoulders together, this is how it should be. At this stage, you can decide to use a hemming gum for the facing of just the neckline on the back piece, or you can decide to use a needle and thread to hem the facing of the neckline for just the back piece. Alright, so the next step is on how to make the sleeve. I placed the measuring tape to measure the entire armhole circumference from here, and what I had is 20 inches. To make the sleeves, I folded this fabric into two. I went ahead to rule the starting line. The next step is to mark the cap sleeve line, which is 4.5 inches. For a plus size person, you should mark 5 inches. Now on the cap sleeve line, I would place the armhole circumference of the blouse, which I initially measured, and I had 20 inches. Since this fabric is folded into two, I would divide that 20 inches by 2 and I would mark 10 inches here. The next step is to connect this 10 inches point I marked to the tip of the starting line to form a slant line. The next step is to mark the midpoint of the slant line. So I placed the measuring tape on the slant line, then folded the tape into two to mark the midpoint. Now from this midpoint, I would connect it to the tip of the starting line, making sure it's half inch above the slant line. Now I would also connect the midpoint to the armhole circumference, making sure it's half inch below the slant line. The next step is to mark the desired length of your sleeve. I want my sleeve length to be on 9 inches. So I marked 9 inches and I added extra 2 inches sewing allowance to the hem, which made it 11 inches altogether. Now on my actual sleeve length line, I placed my tape to mark my round sleeve measurement. My round sleeve measurement is 5 inches, but because this sleeve isn't fitted, I added extra 2 inches sewing allowance to the side, which made it 7 inches. Now I connected this point. So since I'm not lining the sleeve, I would extend this point outward by 1 inch to the hem line. Now I placed this sleeve on my actual fabric to cut out the second sleeve. Now I picked one of the sleeve to secure the hem by folding it 1 inch in and further folding it in by 1 inch. Then took this to the sewing machine to stitch the edges. And I also made the same sewing process for the second sleeve. The hem of the sleeves has been properly secured. Now I placed the center of the sleeve directly on the tip of the shoulder line to pin it. Then I kept pinning the sleeves all through the armhole circumference. After pinning, I'll stitch the edges together by ½ inch. The next step is to pin the second sleeve to the armhole circumference on this side. After pinning, I took this to the sewing machine to stitch the edges by ½ inch. So I've attached the sleeves, and the next step is to place the back piece of the blouse directly on the front piece of the blouse. Now I took this to the sewing machine to stitch the edges of this blouse by 1 inch, following the direction of the chalk. So I turned the blouse to the right side of the fabric, and then I'll take this blouse to the sewing machine to stitch the hem of the blouse by folding it ½ inch in and further folding it in by ½ inch all through. Alright guys, so this is the final outcome of the blouse. I hope it was helpful. You should give it a try, and if you are new to my channel, please subscribe, share and like my videos, and also put on your notification bell so you'll be the first to know when I upload new tutorials. Bye and see you in my next tutorial.